There was I don't know if he's still popular, a psychologist, psychotherapist. He wrote quite a few books, and Carl Rogers is the name. He created his own school of psychotherapy. It's very simple, profound and simple. There's a lot of spirituality hidden in it, without explicitly talking about it. But one could summarize his approach to personal transformation and change. One could summarize his approach saying he believed that, and he learned that through his own many years of practicing psychotherapy with people. As long as you want to change something or change yourself, or the psychotherapist wants to change the patient or the client, whatever they call him, it doesn't work. Change happens when you totally accept whatever it is that arises within yourself. In the case of the therapist and the client of the therapist in a state of unconditional acceptance, he just listens. But what he doesn't say, but what is implied, is you're totally present when you're with the therapist, is with a person. Non-judgmental, totally non-judgmental, attaching no labels. Unconditional acceptance of whatever. The most powerful agent for change then, and this is also implied in every form of spirituality, the most powerful way is not wanting to change yourself or wanting to rearrange who you are internally and so on, but an acceptance of whatever it is that you're experiencing, the way in which you're experiencing this moment. Let's say, for example, there may be certain conditioned patterns in you that you would rather be without. I assume from your question, there are certain things that maybe you can even give an example, the way in which you interact with people or in certain situations. There may be certain, or when you're alone, certain things that arise in your mind that you would rather be without. On the level of the person, you can never achieve perfection. The level of the person is always unsatisfying. So if you're looking for satisfaction on the level of your personal sense of self, all the things that make up the person, all the conditioning, yes, one can improve it to some extent, but there remains always a strong element of dissatisfaction or unsatisfactoriness. With any person is an unsatisfactory entity. So on that level, there's no solution, and every person has its limitations. On the personal, even if you meet the Buddhas, you will find on the level of the person, there will be certain limitations. He doesn't create unnecessary suffering for himself or others. That's absolutely true. But there will be certain limitations. I have limitations on the level of the person. There are things that I'm not good at dealing with, to do with paperwork and things like that, all kinds of things. Person at time has limitations. So the answer is to be more deeply rooted in the presence, so that you're not looking for some kind of answer on the level of the person. Be more, derive your sense of who you are from the presence rather than the conditioned entity in your mind. And then gradually the increasing presence moves into, also to some extent, affects the conditioned entity. It doesn't make it perfect, but it tends to remove major dysfunctions that may be there on the level of the person. So as presence begins to shine through, my terminology that I use is the being and the human. As you're more aware of the being and derive your sense of who you are predominantly from the being, not from the mind-created entity, the person, then gradually the being begins to also shine through. It's a bit like a lampshade. Let's say the person is a lampshade and the being is a light bulb. It's just an analogy. Let's say the being that you are is the light bulb. The shade of the lampshade is the person and some lampshades are they hardly let any light through. This is of course, it's a very limited analogy. All analogies are. But here gradually, the light gradually diminishes the density of the lampshade. But the lampshade will continue to have certain patterns in it. You can't remove the patterns completely. That's fine. So the answer is not to be found on the level of whatever you do and so on, but be more deeply established in presence in everyday life, not just as a separate practice that you do when you're alone or whatever, but as you go about your business, have that sense of the background awareness while you deal with things, talk to people, or you're on the phone, or you're on whatever it is you do. Have that sense of the background awareness, and then you do everything in the foreground. They're not separate. It's like the surface reality and the deeper reality. And so they merge. That's the practice. So the practice is not trying to fix yourself in any way. The practice is to bring presence into as much as you can into every moment. And many times you may miss it. That's fine too. And then you become present again. That's the practice. Don't expect perfection on the human level. Big dysfunctions are removed by presence. Smaller things remain often. Did you mention Nisargadatta? He continued to smoke very harmful, strong cigarettes even after awakening. So there was no perfection. Many other things probably on the level of the person. Yet the major dysfunctions that make life miserable for yourself and others, they go away. He didn't seem to be concerned about how long he was going to live, so he just smoked. It was a habit that stuck with him. It's hard for me to understand how an addiction like that could continue, but it is possible. There have been cases of, even one or two cases of people who seemed quite awake, teachers, who were still actually even drank a lot of alcohol. I enjoy a glass of wine or two with dinner, but I can't get drunk. That's just not. But who knows? It is not for me to judge anybody else. The world moves in mysterious ways, and all I know is that major dysfunctions that create suffering in this world for yourself and for others, they dissolve in presence. Certain other imperfections remain. They're part of the human. They can't get rid of that. If you try to become perfect on the human level, that's horrible. Impossible. Also, you're subject to the polarities, good and bad, and so on, light and dark on the human level. So don't aim for perfection, but through acceptance of whatever patterns still operate in you, conditioned patterns, through acceptance, a lot of change happens, complete acceptance. So the question of wanting to change yourself doesn't arise anymore when there's complete acceptance. So you completely accept certain things that you observe in yourself. And then quite often change happens through that complete acceptance. So perhaps that's the next step in your practice. Just complete it. Then the question arises even anymore. The question disappears from your mind how to fix yourself because you have seen that it doesn't work. So you give up the idea of wanting to fix yourself, and you don't even question yourself, well, am I going to stuck with this for the rest of my life or how much longer? That goes away too. But of course, there are still fluctuations. There are still times when you experience fear that rises from time to time. But the reason, of course, why anybody should be engaged in this, you already realize for yourself, because peace and a sense of aliveness and joyful aliveness, a sense of not being totally dependent on external conditions for your inner state, to have a certain degree of autonomy internally, so that when you're no longer so reactive, when something challenging happens around you, it does not automatically create huge unconscious reactivity in you, thereby amplifying the problem that's happening. All those things are part of the transformation of consciousness from the egoic state to the transcendent state, whatever you want to call it. And really it is an escape from the unhappiness that is inseparable from the egoic state of consciousness. And that, of course, the egoic state of consciousness is still the predominant state in the world. And so people are trapped in that. The Buddha said that even your happiness is part of dukkha, which is suffering, because the happiness can exist without, the high cannot exist without the low. So you experience elation, one day something good happens, and then, as I said before, every condition, every person eventually lets you down. And so you experience this letdown, this disappointment in other people and the world and relationships, and any kind of achievement or possession that you can have, that for a while people think the answer is there. Oh no, the answer is there. It's nowhere to be found. And so the reason why is very simple, and you know it already, you've experienced in yourself. It's freedom from unhappiness, freedom from the burden of a extremely problematic sense of self, so that you become a problem to yourself. You're a walking dilemma when there's no awareness of the transcendent dimension. So it's an escape from suffering. It's an escape from a very limited existence, a kind of bad dream. And for many people, the dream needs to deteriorate before they become interested in the possibility of something else. They would even, as long as the dream is relatively pleasant, you're still okay in the dream. But then the dream changes. And so the one dream, you have the honeymoon, and then you have another dream that comes out of that one, and that's called the drama and the divorce, or whatever it is. And that it's terrible. And then some people go through that several times. I've met people who've gone through it 5 or 6 times, getting married, a year later, 2 years later, divorced, and somebody else getting married. Oh, big reception every time. And then everybody lets them down. Isn't that strange? There must be something wrong with people. They all let me down. And so all this unconscious living, now this is only on the personal level. Then you have the unconscious, the collective aspect of unconscious living, which is even more destructive, even more dangerous, and then even more insane than the personal level of ego. The collective ego that people have, that is the ego of groups of people, entities, nations, political parties, religious groups, not all, but many. The manifestations of this dysfunction that you have on the personal level on a collective level, the way it manifests is extremely destructive. It has manifested the history of the 20th century, just to take one century. Look at the first 50 years of the 20th century. A nightmare, a collective nightmare, a collective hell for millions and millions of people. If an extraterrestrial came, maybe there were some observing us. Of course, they don't want to come in contact with the crazy humans. If they had been observing the first part of the 20th century, they would have to say there's something has gone wrong there. The extreme collective psychosis, definitely there's a deep dysfunction in the human mind, but that is part of the evolutionary process. The dysfunction has become more pronounced now because we are approaching, or we have actually reached, the possibility of going beyond it to another level. So that's why we are here. It's wonderful, and you are part of this process of transformation. Sometimes the mind comes up with all kinds of questions. It questions something that you already know, but then it brings up some doubt. Because the ability of the conceptual mind to understand the spiritual dimension is very limited. It cannot really it tries, but it can't. So it questions. This is one of the hindrances that can come in the questioning mind often attempts to take you out of presence, and it comes up with some kind of thought that questions it all. Maybe I shouldn't be doing all this. Maybe I should be concerned with something more realistic, whatever the mind says. So don't believe in every thought that arises in your mind. Sometimes the egoic self wants to take you out of presence. It doesn't like it. Egoic self being a pattern in your mind. So that's how it is.